Hello and welcome to another episode of CJ's Corner, where we learn how to craft stories that captivate, engage, and influence our audiences. Today we're going to do something unique. I'm going to show you a 60-second video, and then we're going to tear it apart and decide if it has the right story beats. Let's get started. Okay, so we've been talking about the 3-act structure, how to fit it into different projects that we're working on, making sure that we are in a position where we can tell a story effectively that will actually get people to pay attention and so on. In that structure, we have to work with what we call the background or the setup, the normal life. We start out with an example of what normal life looks like. Then there's some kind of an inciting incident that gets the story actually moving and going forward. In the video I'm about to show you, you'll hopefully see where that is. In fact, I'm going to just remind you of these points first, and then we're going to see if you can pick them out. We'll go over them so you'll know for sure. And then there'll be something that leads us to another point and then to another point, but we'll have an aha moment, our turning point as we call it. And that will set up what the story is really about. And it throws you into Act 2, which is where you kind of learn the different things that you need to learn or find the obstacles you need to overcome and find ways to overcome it. And when we're learning in this particular video, we're learning about what is good for us to make our own choices on. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Once we know that, there's some kind of form of raising of the stakes. Let's put it this way. Every time a person goes to change, all their friends, family, doesn't matter who it is that knows them, everyone makes it a little bit harder for them to change. Have you ever noticed that in your life? I've noticed it. For instance, if I need to lose 5 pounds, I decide, okay, I'm going to focus on losing 5 pounds and getting healthier. It is then when people offer me free candy and desserts, and sometimes people just give them to me as gifts, and I'm like, really? So we have we have stakes that are raised, obstacles that are raised against us, which leads us to what we call the dark night of the soul, where you have to dig down deep inside of yourself and figure out, okay, do I really want this change? From there, you regroup and you blast into the 3rd act. Now, in the 3rd act, that is where, if you have a message, whether it's in business or something that you want your family to learn, whatever it might be, that's where you land the message. Sometimes you'll state the benefit. Sometimes you'll allow the story to infer the benefit. It's your choice. Now, at this point, I'm going to jump back to the beginning here by first playing you the video and see if you can't think for yourself on what those points are that we're going to be discussing as you watch it. All right, here goes. Oops. Wrong button. There we go.
Years ago, my son-in-law helped me better understand his life and tribe. In my studies, I learned the phrase wananichi, meaning he who is needed by the people. It was then that I realized my path to bring people back to the true ways of freedom. We have the right to make our own life decisions about our education, career, medical care, spirituality, and so much more. Don't allow others to force or leverage your free choices. Live in freedom.
Okay, now you've seen the video. So let's talk about it. Let's break it down. In the beginning part, and obviously it's a very simple video, it's only 60 seconds long, but in the beginning part, you have what the normal life looks like, the background information. In this case, it's just me out for a jog. I'm running around the park. Pretty simple. Doesn't take much to express what that background is. That's sufficient for this story. Next, we get to the inciting incident. There's a couple places here where you can say, okay, is the inciting incident one specific moment or is it a build of a moment? Either way, doesn't matter. The fact is that when I stated that my son-in-law told me about his life and his tribe, that is the inciting incident. At that point, that's the point of interest for the audience to say, okay, how do I need to learn about this? What's he going to be saying? What is this thing about life and tribe? And that's when I move into the term Wananichi. Now, Wananichi is an interesting term because it's actually referring to medicine men. And basically, he told me, I'm sorry, he didn't tell me that part. I ended up doing more research on my own, and I learned that it basically means he who is needed by the people. Now, interestingly enough, I believe we're all needed by the people. We all have special gifts to be able to bless others, and we need those blessings from our community, just like we need to bless our community. So the Wananichi, some people will say, well, maybe you finding out that information, maybe that's the inciting incident. Well, except for the fact that my son-in-law sharing certain things about his life and tribe is what started me on that path. And the inciting incident is what it is that starts you on the path. It doesn't have to be the big moment. It has to be the thing that gets the fire going, the spark, the match that lights the fire. Now, later you can say, oh, yeah, well, this whole thing about Wananichi is pretty cool, and you having to think through what your path was and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but that's all building, right? So when you talk about an inciting incident, it could be like in a movie, as simple as someone receiving a letter, receiving a phone call, a stranger knocking on the door. I mean, it just has to start the plot line moving. So we knew in the beginning, the background is I'm out running, I'm jogging, doing whatever. Then I learned something from my son-in-law. Boom, that starts the story. That causes me to study, and I learn about the Wananichi and what that means. I realize that everyone's got a path, and we need to figure out what it is that we can bring to the people. And for me, the awareness moment is what we call the turning point in the story, the thing that thrusts us out of the first act and into the second act. For me, it was realizing that I needed to help bring people back to the true ways of freedom. So that's our turning point in the story. Now keep in mind, all of this was just in a few seconds because the whole thing is only 60 seconds long. So if you're doing a presentation for work that's going to be a half hour long, maybe you have more time to develop what those things are. But it wasn't necessary for this story. In fact, I purposely made this story short for two reasons. One, I decided to enter a competition. And two, I wanted it to be short so we could talk about it on this episode. So there you have it. It's that straightforward. Now, when we get to Act 2, we're in a position where we need to have some fun and games. We need to also learn what it is that, how this plays out. Okay, so if I'm supposed to be bringing people back to the true ways of freedom, the exploration here is that I need to understand what are those elements of freedom. And I need the audience to understand what those elements of freedom are. So let's see if that showed up when we got to that segment of the video. I'm going to jump ahead so you can just watch the second act portion. Here we go.
We have the right to make our own life decisions about our education, career, medical care, spirituality, and so much more. Don't allow others to force or leverage your free choices.
Okay, there we have it. So you heard me say the 4 examples of what it was. We have the right to choose, our education, our career, our medical care, things like that. Those are the elements of freedom. Now, the list could have gone on and on, but I just picked a handful for the sake of getting the message across that people need to choose freedom. That's all I needed. So the story didn't require a big elongated list. Some people would say, oh, well, there's 9 pillars of freedom and, things like that. Fine, great. But for my story, that wasn't necessary. I just needed to touch upon it so people had a feel for where we're going. So the second act was all about helping people to understand what they needed to do as far as making free choices. Now, at the same time, I needed to raise the stakes. I needed to make it look as if there was a wall or blockage that would cause us to get to the dark night of the soul. Now, the dark night of the soul is the aspect of, is it possible that we can lose that freedom that I want to make sure we retain? In that, some symbolism works. I didn't have to say it. I could show the memorial service and the hero placard and the flags of the Marines and the Army and so on. And that emotionally could speak to the audience. So you don't always have to, use the exact words. You can show it instead of saying it. If you're in a business presentation, maybe you could just have a cute little slide or a funny slide or a slide that is startling or whatever it might be that expresses the same thing so you don't even have to speak to it. You can just show it. Or maybe if you're sharing a story with your kids, you can act out a certain thing as a character instead of talking about what it actually is. And by them observing the character, they catch on to that point. In any case, you can do it many different ways. And the best way to do it, of course, is the way that causes entertainment to make it fun to listen to your stories. Entertainment should be a driving force because entertainment opens our mind to ideas, which of course leads us to the third act. So the third act is where your lesson needs to land. Yes, if you have a message that you need to get to the people listening, that needs to land in the third act. Let's take a quick look at what mine was.
Live in freedom.
Okay, now that was straightforward. It was simple. It was short. It was concise. At this point, you know what the message is. I want you to live in freedom. I want you to not only know the freedoms you have in the second act, but to choose to live in it in the third act. Now, obviously, the story doesn't know the details of your life, but you know the details of your life. And as the audience person, it's my goal to get you to reflect on that aspect of your life. It's not my goal to tell you how to do it. You're smart enough you can figure it out. But my story needed to get you to think about it. Because maybe, just maybe, we've had a little bit of time where we've neglected to think about things like that. So the bottom line is the message lands. Now, sometimes you want to state what the benefit is in case they need to have kind of a push, emotional push inside of themselves to follow through with practicing their freedoms. But I think in this case, just the mere structure that I used for the story, I think the benefit is inferred. Because after all, who wants to lose what they already have? I don't think you always have to state the obvious. I think sometimes you can just infer it and people will get it. As a matter of fact, the more that's inferred, the more they come up with the idea. And they own that. They have power inside of themselves to act on it because they came up with it. So sometimes you want your story to just salt in that information so the people have a taste of the flavor, and it causes them to do their own work to determine how they need to move forward and live in freedom, or whatever your message happens to be about. Okay, well, that's it for today. I'm glad that you were here, and I hope you liked it enough that you'll click on like on YouTube and share the video with others. That's it for today. So, do I have a close here? I do not. Anyway, have a great one. Bye-bye.